Welcome to another class in our series covering the Rebbe's Mivtzaim, mitzvah campaigns. I believe this is the third class in the series. I think the last class was Shabbos candles, and we've been doing one class a month. This is a special project of Chabad of the Five Towns, an awareness project each month highlighting another one of the mitzvah campaigns. And this class or this lecture series is part of that project. And of course, the entire project is dedicated Lezecha Nishmas Dina Leah Ala Shalom Bas Yibal Chaim Tevim Menachem Mendel Dina Simcha Rosenzweig. So this should be, again, this class among all of the many things that are being done, Lili Nishmas Dina Leah should be in her schus, and not just the class, but the purpose of the class when we're studying about mitzvahs is to actually follow through and do those mitzvahs. So when you're doing these mitzvahs, please have in mind, again, that this is Lezecha Nishmas Dina Leah Bas Menachem Mendel Dveira Simcha. Okay, so Tzedakah, the mitzvah of Tzedakah. I think we called this lecture the quintessential mitzvah. Why? Because I like the word quintessential. It's a fancy word, and how often do I get a chance to use it? But what does quintessential mean? Quintessential means the mitzvah par excellence. Right? If you like French. Or it means how else might you say it? The archetypical mitzvah. All right, there's a lot of fancy words. But what we're trying to say is basically, if you had to pick one mitzvah that's the most mitzvah-y mitzvah of all the mitzvahs, this would be it, hands down. No question. And why do I say that? It's not, it's not that we took a poll and we saw, what did people think was the most quintessential mitzvah. No, this has a source. This is from the Jerusalem Talmud, from the Talmud Yerushalmi. And it's pointed out in Tanya that whenever the Yerushalmi says ha-mitzvah, and it doesn't stipulate which one of the 613 mitzvahs it's talking about, it means tzedakah. Why? Because when you're talking about a mitzvah and you don't stipulate which mitzvah you mean, you must be talking about the most mitzvah-y mitzvah of all the mitzvahs, which is tzedakah. So we're going to speak a little bit about tzedakah, and we're going to hopefully understand why it is the quintessential mitzvah. But before we do, I just want to talk about the campaign. I want to talk about the Mivtza Tzedakah, not the mitzvah, but the Mivtza, the campaign. The campaign of Tzedakah began in Tafshin Lamed Dalet, in the winter of Lamed Dalet. That means 73, 74, which is the year I was born. So this is, but I was born in the summer of 74. So this is like right before I was born. And what was the idea? The idea was to promote tzedakah, specifically in the manner in which the Rambam speaks about it. The Rambam speaks about in connection with Pirkei Avos about the idea of roiv hamaisa. There's an expression, roiv hamaisa, the preponderance of deed, and what that means is that there's a certain advantage to a positive action that's done repeatedly. To the extent that, let's say you had the opportunity to give tzedakah in a lump sum, or to take that same amount, now provided that the recipient didn't need it right away. Obviously, if the recipient needs it right away, then the best thing is to give them what they need now. But let's say that that's not a factor, and it's just a choice between giving a lump sum once or giving repeated donations on a recurring basis, on on a regular basis, that would in the end equal the same lump sum. So which would be better? The former or the latter? The latter. Why? Because that's the idea of roiv hamais, the preponderance of deed. So the idea is to not just give tzedakah, but to become a tzedakah giver. So it's not just the amount that's given, but it's the person giving becomes accustomed to the giving. And this has a tremendous effect on the person. And in the same vein that Rebbe spoke about children being trained in this manner, that children King Solomon, the wisest of all men, told us that when you train a child according to his way, when you work with the child and figure out how to get them to actually absorb an idea and implement it and make it their second nature, then even when they grow old, they won't depart from it. What that means is that it's not just that we want to get children to do the mitzvah once. No, we want to train them in the mitzvah so it becomes habitual. They become accustomed to tzedakah as a part of their routine. And toward that end, the Rebbe very much promoted that children should have their own tzedakah pushka in their room, and that children should be given money for the purpose of being able to have their own money so that they can give tzedakah from their own funds. Hanukkah is coming up, and the Rebbe spoke amazing things about Hanukkah gelt, about the power of giving gelt, literal money, not the chocolate coin gelt, but giving children money on Hanukkah. And one of the reasons that giving money on Hanukkah is so powerful is because it allows children, gives children the opportunity to give tzedakah. When they have money, then they can give tzedakah. In fact, the Rebbe speaks about it as sort of like the antithesis of Hellenism. Because Hellenism, their big problem was they were materialists, and they wanted to Hellenize us and make us materialists, and that's why they were very into physical fitness for its own sake. I say for its own sake because there's nothing wrong with being healthy. In fact, the Rambam says being healthy is part of Avodas Hashem because it enables you to serve Hashem. But to just be healthy for its own sake, to worship the body for its own sake, obviously is not a Jewish value. It's antithetical to Jewish values. And so too, monetary possessions or being wealthy for its own sake is antithetical to Jewish values. But the Hellenists were very into that. And so in order to reject that and to show that we won the war, that we won this war against Hellenization, and we're here to tell the tale. So what do we do to reject materialism? We give our children money and show that money is a spiritual thing. Think about, especially at this time of year, the consumer culture and how people give children their gifts. And, the gifts becomes like, the gift giving becomes like a whole focus unto itself. And, as opposed to a gift where a child plays with it and breaks it and throws it out, and maybe you had fun with it for a week, you give the child money and you're empowering the child to have a teachable moment. The child actually has to think, okay, what's meiser? How do you calculate meiser? Or maybe I'll give chaimish, I'll give a fifth, not a tenth. And where am I going to give it? And how do I give it? And so the entire thing becomes, instead of just this passive thing of getting a gift and playing with it till it breaks, it becomes a real educational experience, which, by the way, the Rebbe used to point out very often that Hanukkah is the same word as chinuch, which means dedication, like rededicating the temple after it was defiled by the Greeks, but also means education, because education means the dedication. You're taking a child and you are setting them up for life. You're dedicating them to the proper path. So one of the main ways that we celebrate Hanukkah in a manner of chinuch is through Hanukkah gelt, giving the children money so that they can give tzedakah. Okay. I spoke a little bit about the pushka. I mentioned that Rebbe wanted children to have a pushka in their own room. The pushka is not just for children. No, not at all. And I want to talk a little bit about the pushka. Pushka's a funny word, but how do you translate pushka? Tzedaka canister. That sounds even weirder. Container. So we just say pushka. Anyways, but it's very interesting. What are the origins of the tzedakah pushka? Do you know the history historically? Like, where does it come from? The whole the advent of the tzedakah pushka. It's very, very interesting. And it's connected to what we were talking about before about giving tzedakah regularly as part of your routine, so it becomes a habit. The tzedakah pushka actually was innovated by the Mittler Rebbe, the son of the Alter Rebbe, the second Rebbe of Chabad. And that's because the Alter Rebbe had started a fund called Keil Chabad, which was to support the Hasidic Aliyah. There were a group of Hasidim from Eastern Europe who moved to Eretz Yisrael, to the Holy Land, in the late 1700s. And the Alter Rebbe took it upon himself to raise funds for these Jews because there was no way of making a living in the Holy Land. And as poor as the Jews in Eastern Europe were, and they were very, very poor, the Jews in the Holy Land were even poorer. So the Alter Rebbe would raise funds for an organization called Keil Chabad. In fact, we'll talk about it in a few weeks on Yud Tes Kislev, the anniversary of the redemption, the release from prison of the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe's imprisonment, at least, we know that it coincided with a kitrig milamayla. There was an accusation in the heavenly court, but at least down here, the way it transpired in the terrestrial realm was he was being charged with sending funds to the enemy. And how did they make such a case? How did the enemies of the Alter Rebbe make such a case? They showed that he was sending money to Ottoman Turkey, because the Holy Land was under the Ottoman Turkish Empire at that time. So if he was raising funds and sending it to Eretz Yisrael, so they were showing that the Alter Rebbe was sending funds to the enemy. Obviously, that wasn't what he was doing. He was sending funds to the Jews who were living under Ottoman Turkish rule in the Holy Land. The point is that raising funds for Keil Chabad is something that is intertwined with some of the most important events in Chabad history. And even after his release, the Alter Rebbe continued raising funds for Keil Chabad, and right now in Chitas, in the Geras HaKodesh, many of the letters are fundraising letters, are essentially letters that are written to the Jews of Eastern Europe, encouraging them that even though they themselves are facing dire poverty, not to stop giving money to Keil Chabad to support the Jews living in the Holy Land. At any rate, you may know that the Alter Rebbe passed away in 1813, and that when he passed away, he was fleeing from Napoleon's advance into Russia. We call it over here in America the War of 1812, and in Europe they called them the Napoleonic Wars. Anyways, the wars bankrupted Europe, and there was a global economic crisis. So obviously a global economic crisis affects everybody, especially the Jews, who were not in such a great situation to begin with. So after the Alter Rebbe's passing, there was a severe shortage of funds. The Mittler Rebbe, who assumed leadership after the Alter Rebbe's passing, told his followers that even if you can only manage to put together a penny a day, obviously I'm saying penny colloquially, the penny wasn't the currency, a kopek or whatever it was, that the smallest currency that they had. Even if you can only put together the smallest amount a day, it's very important to continue to give on a regular basis. And therefore they had the pushkas, and they would put even a tiny amount every day into the pushka, and then the collectors from Koil Chabad would come around once a year, twice a year, whatever it was, and collect the pushka. So the pushka was really instituted as a way that people who could only manage to give small amounts, but wanted to do that on a regular basis, so that they could do that, and that the pushka should be, the Mittler Rebbe says, the pushka should be in the house. In fact, the idea of the pushka being attached to the wall, that comes from that same era, and the Rebbe spoke about this also. That the pushka should not just be in the house; it should be attached to the house. It should be part of the wall. You'll see this in many people in the kitchen, especially. The Rebbe spoke about when women cook, that they should give tzedakah before cooking. It'll bring blessing onto the food. Also, before Shabbos candles. Interesting. Our last class last month was the mitzvah of lighting Shabbos candles. Before lighting Shabbos candles is an especially auspicious time for giving tzedakah. When else should one give tzedakah? Before Shachris, the morning prayer, before Mincha, the afternoon prayer. Not before Ma'ariv, because it's at night, but I'll tell you a funny story about that. Kabbalistically speaking, you're not supposed to give tzedakah at night. Although the Rebbe once told a story. He said that he was in Vienna. The Rebbe was traveling through Europe, and he was in Vienna, and the Rebbe put money in a pushka at night. So somebody came over to him and criticized him and said, don't you know, according to Kisvei Arizal, according to the Kabbalah of Isaac Luria, you're not supposed to give tzedakah at night. So later on, when the Rebbe was in Poland with his father-in-law, with the Frierdiker Rebbe, with his Rebbe, so the Rebbe told his Rebbe, his father-in-law, I put money in a pushka in Vienna, and it was evening, and somebody was critical and said I shouldn't do that. And the Frierdiker Rebbe laughed and dismissed it and said, the person who told you shouldn't give tzedakah at night probably doesn't even give tzedakah in the day. And it's interesting, it's similar to that, by the way. The Rebbe mentioned, at least on one occasion that I know of, that people told the Rebbe, we heard that in Sefer Chassidim it says that if you're in debt, you shouldn't give tzedakah. Because until you pay your creditors, really, why are you giving tzedakah? Really, you should pay the creditors first. They have first dibs before you give tzedakah. So the Rebbe said, the people who bring up that teaching from Sefer Chassidim, how come they didn't follow the Sefer Chassidim regarding how they spent their money when they weren't in debt? You were buying luxuries for yourself when you weren't in debt, and that was okay. That you didn't check if the Sefer Chassidim said that was proper conduct. But now all of a sudden, when you're looking for an excuse not to give tzedakah, now you want to blame it on the Sefer Chassidim that you shouldn't give tzedakah until you paid your debts, right? In other words, you're picking and choosing when to be meticulous, but don't call it a frumkeit that you're avoiding giving tzedakah. The real frumkeit is give tzedakah. So it's sort of similar to that story. The guy was telling me, Kabbalistically, don't give tzedakah at night. Okay, you know what? You want to be so careful, but the real pious thing is to give the tzedakah. At any rate, so the idea of having the pushka in the home, having it right there so that you're giving tzedakah, it just becomes a regular part of the rhythm of the home or of your daily routine. The Rebbe also said to give tzedakah before a medical procedure or a doctor's visit. And if the person is staying in the hospital, they should bring a pushka to the hospital. The Rebbe spoke about giving tzedakah before a business endeavor, so that the business endeavor should be successful. And that's different than giving making a pledge. Well, if I make a certain amount of money at this business endeavor, I'm going to give meiser or chaimish or whatever. And we'll talk about meiser and chaimish in a minute, by the way, about the proportions, how much to give, a tenth, a fifth. But to give tzedakah beforehand, physically, to take money and put it in the pushka, and also. When are other times of giving tzedakah? There was another time I was thinking of. Well, just any old time throughout the day when you think of it. But yeah, I wanted to mention also to have a pushka in the office. A pushka should be in the office. Not just at home, but in the office. And another thing that Rebbe spoke about employers, that they should give a little bit extra money on payday, with the understanding that this extra money is so that the employees can give tzedakah. And that's a very important thing to do. And that's whether the employees are Jewish or non-Jewish, because non-Jews also have a mitzvah of giving tzedakah. And in fact, one of the ways that we should promote the Sheva mitzvahs among, the 7 Noachide laws among non-Jews, is specifically by promoting tzedakah, the idea of giving from one's wealth to those less fortunate. And this is something that applies to Jews and non-Jews alike. Also, by the way, similar to the idea of an employer giving extra money in the paycheck so that the children can, I'm giving away what I'm about to say, so that the employees can give tzedakah, the Rebbe said that principals or school administrators should also give out money to the children so that the children can give tzedakah, and that this should become like a regular thing, that the principal gives out money, and then the children can take that money and they can put it in a pushka there in school. So again, the idea here is not just that the money gets given. Of course, that's important, and that's the bottom line. But how it gets given, that it becomes a routine and it habituates us, it trains us, it refines us, because the giving becomes part of the rhythm of our lives. And it's in the home and it's in the office. And another place that Rebbe said to have a pushka in the car. Yeah, to have a tzedakah pushka in the car. So really, wherever we are and whatever we're doing, tzedakah becomes seamlessly interwoven with those activities, and elevates all of those activities and turns all of those activities into mitzvahs. Now, I said I wanted to talk a little bit about Meiser and Chaimish, about a tithe or a fifth. So let's talk about that for a moment. There is obviously the idea of Meiser, which is a tithe. And in fact, there's the idea of Taser, give a tithe, a tenth, bishvil tisashe, in order that you should become wealthy, by playing with the dot, on the sin, it becomes a shin. So the word for 10 can become the word for wealth. So taser, give meiser, or a tenth, a tithe, in order shetisasha, that you should become wealthy. And then that's a Gemara. It's actually a story about Rebbe Yechanan. But there's also an idea of chaimish. Chaimish means a fifth, which is, obviously twice as much as a tenth. And then our sages say, but don't give more than a fifth, because that's considered extravagant. And if you give more than a fifth, then maybe you're going to become needy. And then, what's the point if you make yourself, now you're going to become a recipient of tzedakah. So generally speaking, a tenth is the regular amount, and a fifth of one's net earnings is considered, mitzvah min hamuvchar, the choicest way to do the mitzvah. However, the Alter Rebbe writes about this in Tanya, especially or specifically in Igeres HaTshuva, that's just for the mitzvah of tzedakah. But there's another reason we give tzedakah beyond the mitzvah. And that is that in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, people would give karbonos in order to atone for their sins and to reinstate their relationship with Hashem. Now we don't have the Beis Hamikdash, so instead of the fat and blood of the sacrifice, we give our own fat and blood through fasting. However, the Alter Rebbe says, we don't do well with fasting, and it becomes counterproductive. So when we fast, it ends up affecting our ability to serve Hashem in other ways. So it's not worth it. But we still need that atonement that the sacrifice would bring. So how do we do it? The Alter Rebbe says through tzedakah. Because the tzedakah is money you could have spent on food that would have replenished your fat and blood. And now by giving the money away, that is equivalent to a loss of your own fat and blood that you would have had through fasting, except it's not going to give you a headache. And we don't want to have a headache, because then you're not going to be able to learn Torah, and not going to be able to do other mitzvahs, and you're not going to be able to be nice to your family, which is extremely important. So, of course, a person with a headache can be nice to his family. I'm just saying, it makes it harder. But if you give tzedakah, then you don't have any of those problems, and you can eat your food and drink your coffee, and it still has the same effect like a korban. So if you're talking about just the mitzvah of giving tzedakah as a mitzvah, the amount is a tenth, or at most a fifth. But if you're talking about giving tzedakah because you need the atonement, because you need something to bring about spiritual healing, and we all need spiritual healing because we've all done things that are less than perfect. So then, why is spiritual healing any less worthy than physical healing? So if a person needed a physical healing, and the money that it was going to cost for the doctor, it was going to cost more than a fifth of his wealth, but would he say, well, no, I'm not going to spend the money on that? A person who, God forbid, he was sick and he knew that something would heal him, would he say, no, I refuse, I won't spend more than a fifth of my wealth? Of course he wouldn't. He wouldn't make such a self-imposed limitation. He would spend whatever it would take so he could get healthy again. And when you're healthy, you make more money, right? But the same thing goes with a spiritual healing. If a person needs an atonement, so he wouldn't limit himself to saying, oh, well, that's too much money. No, whatever it costs, he would spend. So a fifth or a tenth or a fifth, that's the mitzvah tzedakah. But tzedakah does other things as well, which is, like we're explaining, it has the same effect as fasting, which has the same effect as bringing a sacrifice, and therefore you're getting value for your money. So it's not just you're giving it away; you're actually getting value. And therefore, bottom line, the takeaway point here is the limit of a tenth or even a fifth is not in place, and you can spend whatever you feel you need to spend. Obviously, speak to a mashpia, speak to your personal rabbinical guide, and see what makes sense. But even the limit of a tenth or a fifth is not binding when you're giving tzedakah as a way of spiritual healing. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about. We spoke a lot about the effect that tzedakah has on ourselves, that it refines us and we become givers, and through the preponderance of action, through the roiv hamaisa and the repeated action, it makes us into more giving people, more generous people. It clears away the ego, which is resistant to generosity, and we just train ourselves through repeated giving, and it has a refining effect on ourselves. Let's now talk, though, about the macrocosm, the effect on the world, because there's the micro and there's the macro. So let's talk about the effect that the giving has on the universe. There's a concept that gdeila tzedakah shemekareves es hagula. Great is tzedakah that it brings close to redemption. What is this idea? Why does tzedakah bring close to redemption? So to try to convey a very deep concept very quickly, the idea of Mashiach and Geula, the messianic redemption, is not something that happens in some other reality or some other state of being. It's not heaven. I mean, that's one meaning of Olam Haba, the world to come, is the Olam HaNeshamas, or Gan Eden, paradise. But when we talk about Geula, redemption, we mean this world. In fact, the Rebbe pointed out many times that Geula is the word Gola with an aleph. Gola means exile, and Geula is the exile with an aleph. An aleph means the one, means Hashem. So when there will be the revelation of the one in this world will be the place of ultimate spirituality. So we want to make this world holier than heaven. Now, how do we do that? How do we make this world holier than heaven? Through mitzvahs. Mitzvahs have a refining effect on the world. So every time you do a mitzvah, mitzvahs are physical actions using physical objects. You take something physical and you upgrade it from its default state, which is spiritually neutral, and you make it holy. Most of the physical world is spiritually neutral. I mean, there are things that are worse than neutral, that are profane, and those are the things that are off limits, and halacha, Jewish law, prohibits them to us. And those things we don't use. Those things Hashem will pick up at the end. Esruach hatuma ave min haaretz, says Hashem. I will remove the spirit of impurity. That stuff, but that's very little of the world. Ham sandwiches and idols and stuff like that, right? So you leave it alone. But most of the world is fair game. It's neutral and it can be elevated. So everything in the world that we use for a mitzvah becomes elevated. So you drink the tea in order to, I'm going to drink my tea, give the class on the computer, through the FiOS. So all of that becomes part of a mitzvah. So the tea and the computer and the FiOS, these are spiritually neutral on their own, but now they're being used to do a mitzvah. They all get elevated. Or you take the bricks and you build a shul, or you build a school, and you're elevating the physical bricks. Or the classic example, you take the cow and from the cow you make hide, and the hide becomes the parchment of the Torah scroll, or of the tefillin, or of the mezuzah on your doorpost. At any rate, the point is that mitzvahs have a refining effect on the physical, that physical objects can become holy when they become an object of a mitzvah. If we are to define a mitzvah as an act which refines the physical and lifts it to spiritual qualities even while it retains its physical state, right? Because it still remains a physical object, but yet it becomes holy. If we are to define a mitzvah as an act that has that effect, well, Tzedakah is the mitzvah that has that effect most profoundly, most impactfully. Because if you think about it, when you earn money, you put your energy into earning money, and you get your energy from everything, from your food and your drink and also from the home that you live in, that you use to re-energize, and your furniture, and everything that you have goes into giving you the ability to go earn a living. And then earning a living becomes this money, and then you take that money and you turn it into a mitzvah. So basically, think about that. When you've given tzedakah, everything that you have, I'm talking about materially, your own body and your possessions and your comforts and everything that went into giving you the ability to go earn a living, is now channeled into a mitzvah. So that whole chain becomes uplifted and becomes holy. So if a mitzvah is an act that has a refining effect on physical objects, there's no mitzvah that has more of that effect than the mitzvah of tzedakah. And that's why tzedakah is called the mitzvah par excellence, the quintessential mitzvah, the archetypical mitzvah. Because tzedakah has the most wide-ranging effect on refining the physical. All of the things that you have and everything you own, everything that you use, that goes into you being able to maintain yourself, your clothing, your car, your everything, Tell your accountant, it's all a business expense, right? It's all a business expense. It all goes into earning that living. And now you earn that living and you take a piece of it off and you give it away and turn it into something holy. You've elevated all of that. So we see that tzedakah not only has a powerful effect in refining us, but in refining the world. And the more tzedakah we give, the quicker we lift up this world. And that's why we say, G'day tzedakah shemekareves sagula, greatest tzedakah, for it brings redemption. It's not like this random thing that, give a lot of tzedakah and Hashem will reward you with redemption. No, it's a really obvious cause and effect, outcome, that Geula is when the physical world is refined. Well, what refines the physical world faster and more powerfully than taking the money that you earned with your hard work and turning that into a mitzvah? That refines physicality real quickly and real powerfully. So there's a very direct connection between tzedakah and the ultimate perfection of this world. And in that sense, tzedakah is really, you don't get better than tzedakah. And if you think about it, the Rebbe encouraged so many people to do mitzvahs, and so many different mitzvahs. And of course, this class is part of a series of mitzvah campaigns. But if you think about the Rebbe, just when you picture the Rebbe encouraging people to do mitzvahs and actually deputizing them on the spot to become a shliach mitzvah, what is the picture that comes to mind? The dollars. The Rebbe would give Sunday dollars. There was a line every Sunday. And then after, in the later years, after a sicha, the Rebbe would give dollars. Very often the Rebbe would give coins to children. The Rebbe would, come into 770 and he would give coins to the children. And the whole idea of giving out that money, what was the money? The Rebbe said, this is making you a shliach mitzvah for tzedakah. Now, obviously, people would keep that dollar or coin they got from the Rebbe because it had personal meaning, but then they would give that amount, the equivalent, or more, preferably with a hesafa, with an addition. They would give that to tzedakah. So basically, what was the Rebbe constantly doing? Every time the Rebbe met somebody, was deputizing them. Tag, you're it. You're a shliach mitzvah. You are an emissary to do a mitzvah. Which mitzvah? Tzedakah. So every time the Rebbe was giving out a dollar, that was the idea there, is the Rebbe was making you a shliach mitzvah, specifically the mitzvah of tzedakah. So it's a powerful, powerful mitzvah, and one that really has no limit, and we can do it all the time, anywhere. The only time you can't do it is Shabbos and Yom Tov, and for the sake of making this class more complete, let me mention that since we can't give tzedakah on Shabbos or Yom Tov, one thing that I've mentioned is you should give double on Erev Shabbos and Erev Yom Tov. So, you make up for that day as well. Like Lechem Mishnah, like the Mun fell double on Friday. Yeah. So, that's the idea. And let's make an effort to not just to give tzedakah, but to become tzedakah givers through training ourselves and our children to engage in acts of tzedakah repeatedly and regularly. Have a pushka within reach wherever you are, at home, at the office, in your car, so that you can just reach out and give tzedakah, and so that it becomes just a regular part of our lives. And again, I want to remind us that when we do so, let's have in mind that this act, we are acting as the hand of the neshama of Dina Leah Bas Menachem Mendel und Vera Simcha, and very soon through the tzedakah that we give to bring the redemption, we should be reunited with her and with all of the neshamas who are awaiting their return to this world, when this world will be perfected through our deeds, chiefly through our acts of goodness and kindness, our tzedakah. Thank you to everyone. Thank you for joining us.